Hello, my beloved juniors. I realized that I needed to give you a test. I just came to that realization. I misread the chapters, and we're going to have to do the chapter 5 and 6 tests. So one chapter is on law, and the other is on morality and action. So what I've done for you in this presentation is I have created a PowerPoint that covers all the questions. There are 7 questions on the test, and then you can take that uh, the beginning of next week at some point. Alrighty, so let's get to it. All right, the first question is going to be, let us define law. And there's a picture of Thomas Aquinas, and he defines law as follows. 1, it's a law is an ordinance of reason. 2 is for the common good. 3, made by those responsible for the community, and it must be officially promulgated. That's actually one definition, but I broke it up into 4 parts. Hopefully you could break it up and have it make sense for you. So law is an ordinance of reason for the common good, made by those responsible for the community, and it must be promulgated. All right. Number 2 is, what is the eternal law? The eternal law is the plan of divine wisdom, is directing all acts and movements. It's basically the order of the whole universe. There's a divine plan that governs the universe, and it directs all acts and movements. Up next, number 3. What is the natural law, and what are its 2 attributes? Well, the natural law is the rational creature's participation in the eternal law. We are the only creatures. All creatures participate in the eternal law by living out their nature, but we are unique in all of creation because we are rational creatures, and therefore we can understand the eternal law. We can come into contact with the eternal law through our reason. And this natural law has 2 attributes or 2 characteristics. One is its universality, and that means it applies to everyone, and the other is the immutability. It does not change. So the natural law is the rational creature's participation in the eternal law, and it is both universal and immutable. Oliver did the transitions, can you tell? All right, so what are the 3 types of positive law? And give examples of each. Well, here we have these delightful illustrations. The first one is divine positive law. That would be the 10 Commandments. And there we have Moses holding the divine positive law. And then we have the Code of Canon Law. And what does that represent? That represents ecclesiastical positive law. And that's where we'll find our fasting rules in Lent and the laws of marriage. And finally, down in the corner, our police officer giving out a traffic ticket, and that is civil positive law. And those are tax laws and traffic laws and the like. So you're going to give the 3 types of positive law, and you're going to give examples of each. And that is question number 4. Now we go on to number 5, and this is the one that is, the strongest. I'm going to let you choose between A or B. As far as how you will define object. Okay, so number 5 is to define object and will. Now the object, and the first one is John Paul II, is the proximate end of a deliberate decision which determines the act of willing on the part of the acting person. And a more simplified version of that is the letter B. The object is always what the will rationally chooses as a means or as an end. And we're going to add to that the will, because that is a critical component of the object. It's what the acting person deliberately chooses, right? So what is the will? The will is a resolution to bring into being a non-obtaining state of affairs, right? So we make a resolution, a decision, a deliberated on decision, a resolution, and we do an action that there was nothing there before. The will is an event. And that's what not obtaining means. It wasn't there, and we brought it into existence by the act of our will, by an act of our will. So that is the definition of object and the definition of will. Okay, and now up next, what is the intention and what are the circumstances? This is the easier of the questions in this one. The intention is simply the reason, the motive, the why of an act. Why did you do the thing that you chose to do? What was the reason behind it? What was your motive for doing it, right? And we know that intention can be good while the act itself is bad. We also know that even the intention can be bad, even if the act is objectively good. Okay, you can be doing the right thing for the wrong reason. All right, so a bad intention sometimes negates any merit you can gain from a good act. All right, circumstances are basically the considerations that went into the thinking when you were considering what act you were going to be doing. So that is number 6. And finally, number 7. Number 7 is a choice for you. You're going to choose between situation ethics, consequentialism, and or proportionalism. And you're going to choose one of those 3. You're going to explain what the theory claims and then explain why the theory is in error. Okay, the first one is situation ethics. What goes on with situation ethics? Well, you determine the moral good and evil based on the situation. Moral good and evil are derived from the situation that a human being finds himself in. Now, why does this not work? Why do the circumstances that the person finds himself in, as different as they can be, not determine good and evil? Because, as we said earlier about the natural law, the moral law is universal. And because of its universality, because it applies to each and every person, it also applies to each and every situation in each particular case. No matter how unique the circumstances, the moral law, because of its universal nature, applies to that circumstance. The second option you have is consequentialism. And that is a system that determines good and evil from the consequences that follow an act. So the logic is, if the consequences are good, then the act is good. If the consequences are evil, the act is evil. All right? And it violates 2 basic moral principles. You can never do evil that good may come. Just because the consequences are good, it doesn't mean that you are allowed to do it. You are allowed to do it if the act itself is evil. Okay? And then finally, the ends do not justify the means. You can't say, oh, I have a good end, so whatever means I use to get to that good end, they're justifiable. They're not justifiable. So the consequentialism violates those 2 particular moral precepts. And then finally, continuing in number 7 is proportionalism. And that is where you weigh the good and evil as on a scale. All right, the moral value of an act is from the proportion of good and evil effects. Now, if the evil effects are less in proportion to the good by your judgment, remember, this is all by your judgment. You look at an act and you say, well, the evil effects are less, and I think the good effects are more, then the act is good. And if the evil is greater in proportion to the good, well, then the act is evil. The main error here is that we are not omniscient. We are not God. And we cannot foresee all the consequences of a given act, as much as we'd like to believe we can. And being fallen human beings, we tend to look at the consequences as they relate to us and lessen the value of the consequences as they relate to others. So that is the main error with consequentialism. So like I said, question 7, you can choose any of those 3 to answer in the test. All right, and so that is the test that's going to come up next week. You can study for it. I finally got back your dialogue sheets from last week. I'll be reading your dialogue sheets for the doctor, the abortion doctor at Who Converted. And I'll get back to those back to you as soon as possible. So this will take up your time for the rest of the week. And I hope this presentation was helpful. Luckily, you can pause it whenever you would like to. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening.